What was that rather boring book he wrote, the very first one that made them both? Oh, The Beautiful and the Damned. Which really, it couldn't have been a truer title, really, because they were both beautiful. And they were both, in a way, damned, poor dears.
Can we begin where you met Scott Fitzgerald? Can you say a little bit about how you actually came to meet him in the first place?
I first met him in Paris hundreds of years ago, and we all used to go to a little pub called Closerie des Lilas, where it still exists, I'm told. In the Latin Quarter, you sit out in the sun. It's very nice. That's where I first met him. But I met him, you see, with a French friend of mine, René Crevel, who was only he committed suicide, a very brilliant author. And then I met Zelda, of course, who was madly at dancing at that time. And she took up this ballet when she was no longer a chicken. And it made her quite bonkers. Then I lost sight of them again. Met them in the south of France briefly. But when I really got to see a lot of Scott was in Switzerland. In Geneva, we were all at the Beau Rivage. And Zelda was in the Lumley bin at Prangin, you know, under Dr. Forel. And then I used to see a great deal of Scott. But the years, I met him sort of in between the 1920s and up to 32.
When you say you saw a lot of him in Switzerland,
yeah.
How do you mean? Did you accompany him on his visits to see Zelda? Or
did I not? It was nightmare trips. Awful. There they all dressed for dinner at Prangin, the Lunis, and they used to sit at a big table with doctors and nurses, doctors in dinner jackets and nurses in evening dress between the Lunis. But when they had visitors, we had a table to ourselves, not the centre table. And Scott, very much against my will, I had a Pekingese, of course, and I used to take her to the beauty parlour in Lausanne, and he saw a little Persian kitten, a little sweet little Persian kitten, and he went and bought it, and I said, why you buy? Oh, I'll give it to Zelda. I said, you're crazy to give this kitten to Zelda. And he said, oh, Forel said it'd be all right. Forel was the mental specialist there. And of course, she dashed the little thing's head against the wall and killed it. Murdered it practically at once. Awful. I didn't like Zelda at all.
Did you know her before she went into the...
Yeah, I met her first of all when she was already, I thought, bonkers doing all this Russian ballet.
What was she like? How did she behave?
Oh, very easy on the eye. And very elegant. And very American voiced. Scott hadn't got that American voice of Hemingway.
How did they get on with one another, as far as you were concerned?
Oh, Zelda...
And Scott.
Oh, they got on. He was, of course, devoted to her, very concerned about her. Very concerned. Poor Scott. And the one thing that I liked was the little girl, Scotty, the baby, the child, who had a very lonely life. because Mother completely neglected her. She was always in the hands of nurses and governesses and teachers.
Can we talk a little bit about Scott, Bijou? Were you aware of him actually writing any of his novels?
Was I right aware of it? I used to sit and watch him typing and consuming gin, bottle after gin after bottle after gin as he wrote, because these astronomical bills used to come from this lunatic asylum at Pangin. And then Scott would rush to his typewriter and write quickly, and off it would go, this thing, to the Saturday Evening Post, and by return would come vast cheque that paid for a lunatic asylum bill. Oh, he was brilliant the way he wrote. Very quickly.
Was he very moody at that time when Zelda was admitted?
No, we had rather a good time, because we were a whole bunch of friends of mine whom Scott hadn't known before, and we went out a lot, and he didn't work at all at that moment. And then when the bill came, he cloistered himself in my room, which was much bigger than his, and a sun trap, at a table with the bottles of gin, and would type away. But he was never moody. Never when I knew him.
So you
I saw the sunny side of Scott always.
So you loaned him your room to write in?
Yeah. No, I was devoted to Scott. In fact, we were rather in love with each other. And I said, no, you can't, because he at one moment wanted to get rid of Zelda and marry me. And I said, certainly not. It would be most disloyal. Very well. It was very difficult. So then when this became insistent, I sort of broke it off quite. And then she got so much better, you see, and they went back to America. And then she had this terrible relapse, and he went down to Hollywood and hated that he was doing these. And then what was the name of that English woman who wrote a biography about him? She was so good to him. I forget her name now, but he met in America, who was engaged to a peer and dropped the peer and stuck to Scott until the day of his death.
Can you remember him writing any specific books while you were there?
Oh, well, The Great Gatsby was already in his head. He told me the stories that he sent, what he planned to send to the Saturday Evening Post. Before, as he typed, he'd suggest things. But
you mentioned a story of going along to a mental hospital with Scott.
Yes.
A rather amusing story. Can you?
Oh, when we drove into a loony bin, Scott and I, one day, when we went for a lovely country drive, and then we saw a beautiful avenue with trees and things, and we didn't know it was a loony bin. And so we told the car to drive in. Then they practically thought that we were fit patients to keep. We argued with them and said, but I think that he was a little blotter. So was I that day, so we may have made a bad impression on him.
Can you think of any other, or can you remember any other occasions when you went on outings and so on with Scott? You mentioned the one where you...
Well, we went on constant outings the whole time for about 3 months.
This was when Zelda was in the hospital.
But there was nothing sensational as a rule. Possibly a little bit too much drinking, but otherwise nothing extraordinary.
Did you correspond with him when you left Switzerland? You were saying earlier that...
Oh, yes.
You broke it off with him.
Yes, but he used to write, and I'd write back. And then there was, when they got to America and Zelda was better, I was so glad.
You weren't tempted to see him again after leaving Switzerland, were you?
No. No, because then I got very ill myself, you see, and I was stuck in Davos for a long time after, because when he first met me, I was betwixt and between. I'd got out of the sanatorium when I was in Paris. I'd been in Montana. And he took me up to Davos in the end, when I had to go there.
Were you ever in the company of Scott Fitzgerald when Ernest Hemingway was there as well?
Oh, when that awful woman in Paris, yes. Because she liked him very much, that Boer. And she was very pro-Ernest. Ernest then had his first wife. And the boy who was now doing somewhere in Africa, who's not a writer, the son, by that marriage, and does animal. The last I heard years ago was that he was doing animal preservation, you know.
How did they get on together, Scott and Ernest?
They got on well then, but then after there was a great chilling off when Ernest fought, you know, in the Spanish War. And that put Scott off Ernest a bit, I think. I think Ernest was jealous of Scott, because he had no charm and Scott had enormous charm and beautiful manners, and he had no manners at all. He married a journalist in the end, didn't he, Hemingway, I think? Much older woman. He had a lot of wives. You know, that's where I first met them, at Gertrude Stein. And then I introduced this friend of mine, whose name escapes me, to Gertrude Stein, who was rather inclined to ladies of that speciality, you see. And it was all very complicated.
What did you think of Gertrude Stein?
I found her very boring and very repetitive.
Was she part of the sort of set at that time?
Well, she had a subtle. She was a very practical woman, because you see how she got all Picasso's things for practically nothing. She went in for the cultural, the artistic things, and when Picasso was so skint at that time, she had a beautiful collection of Picassos for practically nothing. Just for a meal, he'd give her a Picasso.
Because you knew Picasso at that period too.
Oh, I knew Picasso well, and after I knew Picasso, again latterly, when I was lost in the south of France and he was up at Beausoleil up there, I used to go to his villa. Then he was doing these Gothic tiles that I didn't like very much.
What about Nina Hamlet?
That's the woman I was looking for, Nina. I loved Nina, but she never could. Did you believe she committed suicide? I don't. Remember, she broke her leg. I was abroad at the time, and she was in that hospital in Prague Street, the Queen Mary's, and then she went to Westbourne Terrace, you know, near there in Paddington Way, and she had a flat on the first floor, and she fell out the window. People say that she jumped out, but I don't believe that at all.
Did you have any Picasso paintings and drawings?
I had two, yeah.
But he gave you them, did he?
All blitzed. Everything. But the worst thing was the Gauguin and the Van Gogh that I had. Those were wedding presents that were given to me.
You always seem to have gravitated toward artists and writers.
Creative people, musicians.
Oh, now, here, talking of writers, Compton Mackenzie, who died not so long ago, I knew very, very well indeed, because he was one of our backroom boys in the 1418 war, after he was invalided out, he'd been serving in the Dardanelles and things, and he became head of our intelligence in Athens. As opposed, the Germans had a very jolly man called Baron Schenk who was spying for them in Athens. And our agent was Compton Mackenzie and Eddie Knobloch, who wrote that charming play, My Lady's Dress, a dramatist. And they were our Secret Service people there. He was young then, Compton Mackenzie. He was in his only 32. But we always kept in touch. He was devoted to my father. He mentions me in his Athenian memories. He said I was the first, as far as I remember, of the bright young things. Awful. Because he was riddled by a man with arthritis, young as he was. And I've seen him literally rolling on the floor and biting the carpets with pains in my slum at the top of the legation. From the agony of it.
Did Scott Fitzgerald talk about any of the other writers at that period?
He liked the French ones. He was devoted to this friend of mine, Hove.
Do you think he'd have written so much if, during that period, had it not been for having to pay the bills for Zelda?
Well, that was always for the doctors and the sanatoriums. She was very extravagant, Zelda.
You mean in the way she hired the piano teacher and coach for her singing and dancing?
This dancing, I forget the name of this Russian. She was a Russian émigrée princess who started this school in Paris. This ballet school. And a lesbian too. You see, she completely turned Zelda's from. She wouldn't live with Scott as his wife in any way when she took to ballet. Yes, she became very, very much one of the girls, if you know what I mean. Like Nina Hamlet.
And Gertrude Stein.
No, who was a notorious one. But I liked Nina very much. They really didn't see very much of each other at that period. She caused a great stir at her. There was a big, I don't know whether it was a play or concert, and she was allowed to go to see that. They had a box at the theatre in Geneva. And the next that they knew, there was a nurse, of course, with her. But she suddenly took all her clothes off and stood in the front of the box starco. That shocked the Swiss rather, and she had to be bundled out. Yet I know annoyed Scott very much. Oh, that must have been 28, I think. 27 or 28.
The picture that one seems to get from what you're saying is that Zelda, increasingly behaved in a very peculiar fashion.
Very peculiar fashion.
And yet Scott didn't seem to see it, or at least he perhaps didn't want to see it.
Well, he was devoted to the little girl, to Scotty. The child. He really looked after Scotty much more than Zelda ever did. He bothered about her education and her welfare and everything. Loved Scotty.
Was she affected by all these goings-on?
I should think I didn't know the child at all. Well, she was only a youngster when I knew her. But it must have been very unsettling for her, poor little girl. But then they got very close to each other in the latter years when he was at Hollywood doing the script writing or whatever it was, so ill. And he always used to keep in touch. But Zelda wasn't attached to the child at all. I had a lot of other friends. I mean, I had that extraordinary Marchesa Casati, Luisa Casati, who was as mad as a hatter, and used to carry, what is that drug that you get in a lump? and you scrape it off and put it in your cigarettes. No, is it hashish or what is it? A rock sort of thing. Louisa always had that, and that caused great embarrassment publicly in bars and things. She screamed for a sharp knife so as to scrape it and put it in our cigarettes. I didn't like it at all, nor did Scott like it. Then there was a dear friend of mine, really a real friend, long before any of your times, Lord Addington Knapp's, who was a lot with us at that time too. He died at the beginning of the last war in Egypt. Great loss to me. No, we were a funny crowd there, because there was the American ambassador to Madrid and his wife, Alexander Weddell, and they didn't approve of Scott very much, because Weddell had known me as a youngster in Greece and thought that it wasn't fit company for me to mix with. When he arrived and found me in those rather bohemian surroundings in Switzerland, he had a house called House Virginia, and he left to the state of Virginia. They were killed in a railway accident, the Weddells, on Christmas Day. Poor people. So I never saw this lovely place that I was invited to go to.
Did you actually live near Scott at that period, in the Bohemian end of the city?
Oh, at this bumming about, we were all at the same hotel. It still exists, the Beau Rivage at Ouchy, just on the lake, below Lausanne. It's part of Lausanne. Ouchy is a suburb. You go down, it's the lakeside, it's the front. Lovely garden. My dog liked it very much then. My peak was very popular.
And Scott used to come and write in your room, or you used to loan him your room?
I didn't loan him my room, he just came in and wrote there. He didn't like being alone. And I don't know, he thought I was a soothing influence on him. Well, we had a roaring, screaming affair, if you really want to know. Boils down to that. But I refused to marry him. He wanted to get rid of Zelda. And I said, no, there's Scotty.